Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. Today saw the first direct Q&A between senators and Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. How did she respond to a wide range of issues from abortion to her sentencing record, plus some unexpected fireworks in the hearing room? The thought of communist spies among us is not a theme of a Hollywood movie. It is a very real reality. The Department of Justice has just charged 5 U.S. nationals for working as agents of the Chinese Communist Party. How many more are lurking throughout our country's institutions? President Biden is warning business leaders that they might be the target of a Russian cyber attack in retaliation for U.S. support of Ukraine. It's day 2 of Judge Jackson's confirmation hearing, and senators got their first chance to question her directly. What did they press her on? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Here comes the first day of direct questioning by senators to determine whether Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will sit on the bench of the U.S. Supreme Court, potentially for the rest of her life.
By a term of medieval justice known as the trial by ordeal.
And Jackson's grilling came as expected. On top of the list was her judicial philosophy.
Adherence to text is a constraint on my authority. I'm trying to figure out what those words mean as they were intended by the people who wrote them.
Jackson said the Supreme Court has adopted originalism. She also asserted support for abortion precedent.
Roe and Casey are the settled law.
Declined to say whether she backs expanding the Supreme Court.
Judges should not be speaking to political issues.
And pushed back on criticisms that she's been soft on crime and lenient in sentencing child pornographers.
As a mother and a judge who has had to deal with these cases, I was thinking that nothing could be further from the truth.
Senator Ted Cruz also pressed Jackson on critical race theory, referring to CRT books taught at a school where Jackson serves on the board.
Do you think that's an accurate way of viewing society and the world we live in?
Senator, I don't think so, but I've never studied critical race theory and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
Another heated line of Republican questioning was directed not so much at Jackson as at previous attacks by Democrats toward GOP nominees such as Amy Coney Barrett.
Do you attend church regularly? How would you feel if somebody up here on our side said, you know, you attend church too much for me, or your faith is a little bit different to me, and they would suggest that it would affect your decision? Would you find that offensive?
Senator,
You're reluctant to talk about it because it's uncomfortable.
Today's hearing started at 9 a.m. and is stretching well into the evening. And tomorrow we'll see a second round of questioning in which all 22 members of the committee will each get 20 minutes. So expect another long day and more fireworks ahead of us. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee are investigating potential misconduct by the FBI. The FBI conducted a secret audit of its own investigation practices in 2019. The audit revealed hundreds of compliance errors when investigating U.S. public officials, political candidates, or religious organizations. In a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray, the lawmakers asked Wray to answer for inconsistencies between his testimony to Congress last year and the compliance errors found during the agency's internal audit. The lawmakers will investigate the 2019 FBI audit and whether the agency is following its own rules. The Chinese Communist Party has been able to turn some of its own citizens into de facto spies for the regime. The long tentacles of their spy agencies reach far beyond China's own borders and are operating right here in the United States. Both U.S. citizens and Chinese nationals living in the U.S. are actively assisting the CCP in their intelligence operations. We ask our next guest, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, what he thinks of all of this. But first, we ask him about a recent letter that he penned to our very own FBI. Congressman Andy Biggs, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
You bet. It's good to be with you.
Congressman, you sent a letter to the FBI recently yesterday, requesting to launch an investigation into a secret FBI audit. Tell us exactly what you're searching for.
Yeah, so what happened is Christopher Wray indicated that there had been no violations or a very limited number of violations, and yet the word we've received is that there was an audit performed which showed a serious number of infractions, which would indicate a couple of things. Number one, that the FBI was abusing its authority, at least in several instances. And then the second thing is that Christopher Wray, when he was testifying before Congress, had been less than truthful. And we need to get to the bottom of that, because when you before Congress, you got to tell the truth, obviously, especially when you're sworn in. And the second thing is, if the FBI in certain instances is violating their duties and the law, then they need to be held accountable.
Congressman Biggs, I want to ask you about something else. Excuse me. Last week, the Justice Department announced 5 individuals were charged with harassing and spying on U.S. residents on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party's secret police. One of these cases is actually related to election interference. How concerning is this type of activity to you?
That's very concerning. I mean, I think we have thought for a long time, at least many of my colleagues and I have thought for a long time, that there's been Chinese Communist Party infiltration into a number of our institutions, whether it be post-secondary education, but also I have felt personally that just as the allegations against Russian interference into our elections have been in some ways overblown, but nonetheless real. And when I say overblown, I mean the instance of collusion between campaigns, the Trump campaign. I think that was proven to be not real at all. But we have neglected the notion that China has been also an active player and has some interest in infiltrating our election systems and compromising our election integrity.
You touched upon it. How widespread do you think this is, where the CCP is able to use U.S. citizens to spy or work on their behalf, as you mentioned, within our various institutions and beyond?
Well, I think the possibility is pretty broad and widespread, and here's why. Our economic relationship with China is so vast, so broad, so deep that it provides an opportunity to infiltrate various networks within the country. Secondly, is we have so many Chinese student visas that come over and other work visas that come over that you wonder, how broad can this be? When we talk about Russian infiltration, I mean, it would be comparatively small to the CCP, and the reason is there's just so much, such a larger network of interconnectivity between the United States and our institutions, including our economic institutions, and China.
It's a very interesting point. Congressman, Antony Blinken, Secretary Blinken yesterday actually restricted visas of Chinese officials who are involved in persecuting religious minorities in China. From your perspective, should further action be taken, and if so, what can be done?
Well, that certainly is a long overdue action in my estimation. First of all, I mean, he's attacking the notion of what's going on with the Uyghur Muslim population and other dissidents and the attacks by the CCP on them. I mean, if you're outside the CCP, you're treated as a second-class citizen, if that well. So the first thing is there. I think the other thing is to encourage a repatriation of our economic institutions and our corporations and our manufacturing that is sitting in China and our dependency upon the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that really is something that I think President Trump was trying very hard to do. And the reason I think he was trying to do it is twofold. It's a blessing to our own economy and our self-sufficiency at home, which was greatly exposed during the COVID epidemic and how reliant we were on Chinese manufacturing. But it also sends a message to the leaders of the CCP and China, and that's an important thing. I mean, I'm never a big believer in intervention internationally, but I do into another nation's domestic politics. But I do think that we have a responsibility to an America First foreign policy, which actually would be beneficial to non-CCP citizens of China.
Congressman Andy Biggs, thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
President Biden is warning business leaders of potential Russian cyber attacks. He says this is in response to U.S. support for Ukraine. Biden is reiterating warnings due to evolving intelligence that Russia may be planning attacks on American companies and critical infrastructure.
The magnitude of Russia's cyber capacity is fairly consequential, and it's coming. The federal government is doing its part to get ready, but under U.S. law, as you all remember, the private sector, all of you, largely decides the protections that you will or will not take in order to protect your sources.
Biden urged businesses to shore up their cyber defenses to protect themselves and to protect the national interest. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Tuesday that she's tested positive for the CCP virus yet again. She will not travel with Biden to Europe on Wednesday for meetings on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Psaki tweeted that she took a COVID test in preparation for Wednesday's trip. She was later notified of a positive result. She said she will follow CDC guidance and work from home. She will not accompany Biden to Belgium and Poland. Psaki said Biden tested negative for COVID after taking a PCR test on Tuesday. This is the second time that Psaki has tested positive for the CCP virus. She tested positive at the end of October of 2021 and did not travel with Biden to the G20 summit in Rome. Former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin is considering running for Alaska's congressional seat. The position was left open by the sudden death of Congressman Don Young. Young died on Friday at the age of 88 on his flight back to Alaska. Palin said on Newsmax that she would be humbled and honored to replace Young. According to Alaska law, a special primary election will be held between 60 to 90 days after the representative's death. Palin also said that she will see how the process goes in filling that seat. DC's cherry blossoms are now at peak bloom. We bring you a glimpse of these iconic trees and the Japanese culture they originate from. Inflation is raging and the feds have already started to raise interest rates. Will this be enough to tame the inflation, or is a recession likely on the horizon? CDC explains why thousands of COVID-related deaths were removed from its data tracking website, including 1/4 of all children deaths. Hello and welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. Inflation is much too high. This says Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. He says the central bank needs to raise interest rates more quickly. Last week, the Fed raised rates for the first time since 2018, and there are several hikes expected in the coming months. That could raise the federal funds rate to about 2.25%. It's now at around 0.5%. That means higher rates could be on the way for mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, and other borrowing. More and more Americans are feeling the effects of inflation than ever before. A salad that used to cost $9 now costs $14. When it once cost $38 to fill your gas tank, it's now costing $58. To assess if there's any end in sight, especially as China begins to lock down their economy again over another spike in the virus, we have founder of Alpha Investor, Charles Mizrahi. Charles Mizrahi, thank you so much for joining us again on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Charles, when it comes to inflation, I just want to get your thoughts on the rising interest rates. We just saw it go up 0.25%. What is the impact of that, and is there any cause for concern for future increases that are projected to come?
Well, the impact of the 0.25% is too little too late. The Fed should have been trying to get ahead of the curve about last year time when everybody and his mother-in-law saw inflation coming. Prices were rising at the pump, prices were rising for food. There were tight labor markets, so companies were paying more for labor. So everyone saw this coming except the Fed. The Fed called it transitory. And now they're trying to play catch up with inflation which according to their numbers, they're projecting to be at about 4% by the end of this year, which is a pipe dream. It's probably going to be much higher because the CPI is already close to 8%. So a 0.25%, it's not going to do much. The Fed will have to raise rates. And yesterday, Chairman Powell said that they're going to have to be more aggressive. So that could possibly mean 0.5% or 1% increases in the foreseeable future.
And what are the implications of higher interest rates in terms of, there's the one side of it that it may offset some of the inflation, but does it also have any other negative impacts that the American people might want to be aware of?
Oh, dang right. Out of the 13 times, I think it was 16 times they raised rates, out of 13 times they put the country into recession. It's really, really a difficult act. And I just want everyone to realize, your viewers to realize how this works. When the economy starts speeding ahead, the way the Fed taps the brakes is by raising interest rates, which makes the cost of borrowing more expensive. So therefore, if the borrowing is massive, people will stop spending more, inflation will try to subside, and we'll get to some sort of equilibrium. That works in the textbooks and in the ivory towers. It's very, very messy when you do it in the real world, because what happens is the Fed is sometimes behind the curve like they are now. They're going to have to play catch up, and you can't corral a 4 or 5% inflation rate by raising rates to 2%. You have to get the interest rates have to be ahead of the inflation in order to bring it in. So it's going to be a big impact, no question about it. And consumers are right. We're dealing with it. We're dealing with higher energy costs. We're dealing with higher food costs. We're dealing with construction costs. We're dealing with higher costs. You name it. Welcome to the 1970s.
Well, Charles, another major thing impacting the economy is the supply chain. We rely on China's factories for many of our products, medical supplies, home furnishings, for example. Now China is starting to lock down again the economy because of the virus uptick over there. Can we expect another wave of supply chain issues from this, and how severe do you think it might get?
Well, look, China and the Far East, we import a lot of stuff from them, and almost virtually everything. I remember during the pandemic, when you went on Amazon, many of the things were sold out or were non-existent simply because China shut down. So we are very, very vulnerable to supply chain issues. Anytime China burps, we're going to feel indigestion here in the States. No question about that. How severe? It depends on how long they lock down. But, what we can't get away from is we live in a global community, like it or not. What happens in China affects us here. When a shipping crane doesn't work in Bangladesh, that means someone's goods are not going to be put on a ship and not to get to a Walmart and be delayed, and prices are going to go down, and that manufacturer is going to make less money. It's just the way everything works together. So, I was looking the other day, if you're 40 years old or younger, you have never experienced inflation. And I remember growing up in the 70s and the 80s, supply chain issues weren't such a major factor, but inflation was. And that really is what has to be tackled. Because if you don't tackle that, it's like, by the way, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Charles Mizrahi, thank you.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks so much.
Last week, a D.C. judge blocked a new law that allows children in the nation's capital to get vaccinated without their parents' consent. Parents challenged the law passed by the D.C. Council in 2020, allowing kids as young as 11 to vaccinate without telling anyone. The lead attorney on behalf of the families says that the D.C. law violates a federal vaccine injury law.
The National Vaccine Act requires that parents shall be given what's called vaccine information statements. This is a one-page, or it's two pages, which explains the risks and benefits of vaccinations.
He added that the D.C. law is dangerous because a child could have an adverse reaction to a vaccine and parents wouldn't know why. Democratic Mayor Muriel Bowser has 30 days to appeal the court's decision. Otherwise, the order remains in effect. According to a COVID data tracking website, the CDC removed over 72,000 deaths. Among them were the deaths of 416 children, amounting to almost a quarter of the child COVID deaths listed by the agency. In an email to the Epoch Times, a spokesperson for the CDC said the agency constantly reviews its COVID-19 data to ensure its accuracy. The spokesperson added that the adjustment was based because the CDC's algorithm was accidentally counting deaths that were not COVID-19 related. The cherry blossom trees scattered throughout Washington, D.C. are a symbol that spring has arrived. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with a peek at the blossoms and a view of the culture from where they originate.
If you take a walk around DC's tidal basin at this time of year, you're surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms. All of them are beautiful, but they aren't all the same.
Like, I had to come to this tree specifically because it was the right shade of pink. Some of the other ones around are like whitish color or like a very dark pink, but this one is kind of like a pastel color. Like, you could see how it's tinted there.
Some flowers fully bloomed, others soon to open, sitting against a backdrop of the water, sky, and happy faces. Details that are easy to miss unless you see it with your own eyes.
You know, until you see it in person, it really is difficult to imagine just how amazing it is. So,
in Chinese culture, they represent love and the female mystique.
I think yesterday was the peak, so we came out today to get some sun.
The flowers are very popular in Japanese culture as well. Cherry blossoms are Japan's national flower. In Japan, they're called sakura, and these trees were planted here in the U.S. in 1912 as a gift from the people of Japan.
And this Japanese statue is placed right here in the middle of all of these cherry blossom trees. Japan gave the statue to America in the 1950s to symbolize the spirit of friendship between the two countries. It represents earth, water, wind, fire, and sky.
Not only do these flowers at DC's tidal basin symbolize friendship, they also foster friendship by allowing a space for moments like this to be reflected on for years to come.
So we've been friends for like 54 years. We're just enjoying the friendship, the beauty of these trees, the loveliness of the day, our friendship, because we're talking about the years, that we didn't get along and the purpose of a friendship.
And here's a mother and daughter bonding over the cherry blossom's inner meaning, which in Japanese culture symbolizes renewal and the fleeting nature of life.
Life doesn't last forever. Cherry blossoms don't last forever. They're only here for a while. There's peak bloom, post bloom, and then they're gone. So
I share everything with my daughter. We're best friends. We do everything that we can together. We try and experience life to the fullest. And I just love her a lot, and I just want to share every moment I can with her.
They usually last up to 2 weeks after blooming, so cherish them while they're here and then wait until next year. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Steve Lance from Washington, D.C., and we'll see you back tomorrow.